With the release of the recent chapter, we see that Sukuna has spun the Mahoraga wheel 4 times and is now adapted to infinity. And this is why, even though he was knocked unconscious, Mahoraga was able to come up out of the shadow and cut Gojo. And although there have been a bunch of posts saying that it is looking really bad for Gojo and that he is probably going to lose in the next couple of chapters, I wouldn't say that quite yet, because knowing what we know about Mahoraga's adaptation leads me to believe that Gojo still has a very good chance in this fight. Because although adapting to infinity definitely is an advantage, I don't think it's as big as an advantage that people are making it out to be. And we also don't even know how effective this adaptation will be, and I'll explain why. So first, let's discuss how this adaptation works. We see that when Sukuna is fighting against Mahoraga, he says that Mahoraga can adapt to any and all phenomena. But this isn't exactly what it's worded like. Adapting to something doesn't mean that you're invulnerable to it, at least not when it comes to Mahoraga, because we see throughout the fight with Sukuna, Mahoraga had adapted to his slashes, but he was still getting cut to pieces. It's just that you can't kill Mahoraga with an attack that he is adapted to. You can still land attacks like Sukuna does with his slashes, it's just that it won't fully take Mahoraga out of the fight. Because we know that although it says Mahoraga has adapted to infinity, it doesn't say he's adapted to blue or red. So even adapting to infinity doesn't mean that he still can't get thrown around or be hit by blues and reds. But just because you can hit Mahoraga with blue and red doesn't mean you can take him out with blue and red, because we know that red is supposed to be twice as powerful than blue, but saying that Mahoraga would just die to a single red is a bit ambitious. We know that Gojo thought he could destroy Mahoraga in one hit when using red, but to know whether or not he would have one-shotted Mahoraga would just never know what actually would have happened there. But you see, this is where the problem comes in for Gojo. You see, he needs to destroy Mahoraga in one hit with red. Using multiple reds would just allow Mahoraga to adapt to multiple attacks, and then he would just adapt to red as a whole, which is the sad predicament that Gojo is in, and this is why even Sukuna says that Gojo is purposefully only using blue because he doesn't want his red to be adapted to. Because other than purple, red is Gojo's most damaging attack, and there's also seems to be some sort of charge up time with purple. And I don't know if in the midst of combat, say in the middle of throwing hands or when he's just in front of Sukuna a bit, if he can just charge up a purple and hit Sukuna before Sukuna sees it and moves out of the way. But on the other hand, red is very quick and very powerful. He can use it in the midst of combat and even while throwing hands, so he can hit Sukuna with a powerful attack before he can dodge out of the way. And this is why we've seen Gojo use red multiple times and actually successfully hit Sukuna. We even saw in the recent chapter that a red was able to fly around Sukuna's back and Gojo was able to land a black flash punch in Sukuna's gut. There is no way that Gojo can let Mahoraga adapt to red because of how useful it has been this entire fight. But here's where we run into a bit of a problem. You see, so far I've been talking about the future of the fight, but we have to see how much damage this slash will do to Gojo. And I will say this, because of everything that has happened so far throughout the fight, it is a bit hard to say how much this slash will actually affect him. And I will give my answer to how much I think this slash will affect Gojo, but before I do, I want to explain my thought process. You see, normally a slash isn't that big of a deal, and even a slash like this, it doesn't look that deep. We can only see the shoulder area for where Gojo was cut, and it's not like it went through his entire body. We saw that Gojo was able to take even more slashes at a much higher volume when inside Sukuna's domain expansion, because he was just able to heal and he was okay. We've also even seen back in Hidden Inventory when Toji stabbed through his entire body with a sword, Gojo just healed from it. He even compared it to being a pin going through a safety knit sweater. But there's a big problem here that wasn't in the previous scenarios. Right now, Gojo's brain is becoming sort of fried. We see that both he and Sukuna have pushed their brains to the limit, but the way in which Gojo has is much different than Sukuna's. And before I explain how Gojo's brain has been pushed past its limits, I want to say that maybe right now healing with reverse curse technique won't negatively impact Gojo. Because when Sukuna is explaining why Gojo's brain has been cooked, it happens in a very specific way that might not apply if Gojo was only trying to heal himself. So let's get into the explanation. We see that when Gojo tries to open up a domain expansion against Sukuna for like the 5th time, it fails and he gets a nosebleed. And we see that the reason he gets this nosebleed is because, as Sukuna describes it, every time you use your domain expansion, after the clash is over, you can no longer use your curse technique for a short amount of time. And this is because using a domain expansion burns out your curse technique. But Gojo's been doing something different. Sukuna says that curse techniques are engraved somewhere around the prefrontal cortex. So what this means is that after using a domain expansion, that part in your brain where your curse technique is supposed to be, that curse technique is burnt out. So what Gojo had been doing is destroying that part of his brain and then healing it again with reverse curse technique. Doing this over and over, destroying this part of his brain and repairing it again and again is what caused Gojo's brain to fry. And we know that by this point in the fight, Gojo had done this process to his brain 5 times. And Yuta says that even doing this once would be way too risky. And this is why Sukuna explains to Gojo that there are limits to the brain compared to just flesh and bone. So now let's bring this back to the present and answer the question of how dangerous this slash is to Gojo. Would the damage that Gojo has taken a couple chapters ago to his brain hinder him while trying to heal against Maharaga's slash? And I would say I don't think it would hinder him. I think that Gojo should be able to heal from this slash because he's doing a completely different process with healing this time than he was doing back when he was frying his brain. You see, now Gojo would just be using the positive energy from the reverse curse technique and dispersing it throughout his body to heal from the slash. It is a completely different process than the one that was hurting his brain, because the process that was hurting his brain was destroying a piece of his brain and then repairing it again. Gojo would just be targeting a completely different part of his body now, which is why Sukuna said that flesh and bone don't have the same limitations as the brain, because Gojo was hurting himself by destroying a piece of his brain. Now Gojo would be healing his flesh and bone, which Sukuna said do not have the same limitations as the brain, so I think that Gojo would just be able to heal his body from this slash that he has taken from Maharaga. So now that that's covered, let's talk about on the Sukuna side of things, how much of an advantage will he gain now that Maharaga has adapted to this infinity? What will this change about his fight game plan? And I will say this, I want to cover up one misconception about adapting to infinity. It is Maharaga that adapts to infinity and Maharaga that adapts to unlimited void. All of these adaptations go to Maharaga. Yes, Sukuna uses the wheel to see through and adapt to curse techniques, but once it's time and the adaptation is fully complete, he always summons Maharaga to come finish the job that he has planned. Now, this is very important for a couple of reasons. This means that reaching through infinity will be Maharaga's task, which means that Maharaga will need to be fast enough to keep up with Gojo in combat in order to make this infinity adaptation even useful. The reason that Maharaga was able to get this slash off in specific is because Gojo's leg was trapped in the shadows. If Gojo's leg wasn't trapped, he would have had a better chance at avoiding the attack. Now, if it was Sukuna himself that gained these adaptations, then I would say it would look much worse for Gojo. And the reason I'll be saying this is because Sukuna can actually keep up with Gojo in combat. We don't know exactly how fast this Sukuna Maharaga is. We don't know if it's as fast as the last Maharaga, but if the Maharaga now is anywhere near in speed as the Maharaga that fought Sukuna, then Gojo shouldn't have any problem dodging Maharaga's attacks, because even a 15-finger Sukuna from that time was able to just blitz around and cut Maharaga to pieces. Speed was never the problem for Sukuna in that fight with Maharaga, it was just finding a lethal blow to take him out. So since this adaptation to infinity is Maharaga specific, it really just is up to speed for whether or not this adaptation will be extremely useful for Sukuna or not. If Sukuna can consistently get these scenarios where Gojo's leg is stuck in a shadow, well then yeah, I think Sukuna has the big advantage. But if Mahoraga is still relative in speed as he was from the time he fought Sukuna, then I think that Gojo should do okay. Because when you think about it, the best time for Sukuna to capitalize is right now, while Gojo is falling to the ground and is just taking a big cut from Mahoraga. But the problem is, Sukuna is knocked unconscious. His eyes are completely white because he just got hit with a black flash to the stomach, which means that Gojo will have time to heal from the cut he's just taken. And also, just in case anybody is wondering, well, what if Mahoraga just continues to slash Gojo while his legs are stuck? Gojo's legs are no longer stuck in the shadow, and because of the speed thing that I brought up earlier, I think that Gojo will be able to evade. Although it may seem obvious that Gojo's legs are no longer stuck, it is something that a few people could just glance over quickly, so I thought I would bring it up. Which means now we should talk about the effectiveness of red and blue for the remainder of the fight. We see that it's questioned exactly how many spins Mahoraga needs in order to adapt to something. We see that when it came to Unlimited Void, it only took 1 spin, but when it comes to the Infinity, it took 4 spins. We don't know exactly how many spins it would take for red to be adapted to, which is why Gojo isn't using it carelessly. We see that he just recently used red to catch Sukuna off guard, but he did that in a sneak around manner. He didn't do it to where Sukuna could see the attack coming. The red hit Sukuna in the back and Gojo hit him with a black flash to the stomach right after. But funnily enough, the wheel was able to work on its own even after Sukuna was knocked unconscious and the wheel fell from his head. After Gojo landed the black flash on Sukuna, he adapted to Infinity even while he wasn't conscious. And this is what makes Mahoraga and Sukuna so scary. You see, it's possible that Gojo would be able to hit Mahoraga with 3 or 4 reds before he ever adapts, but it's also very possible that after only being hit by red once, Mahoraga would be able to adapt and then red would no longer be able to kill him. Plus, we also know that Mahoraga is extremely tanky. We know that he's a Shikigami, he's not a cursed spirit, so just because there's positive energy in the red doesn't mean that it will just annihilate Mahoraga. We see that he even uses a sword of himself that is enveloped in positive energy. Now, when it comes to Mahoraga's durability, it is a bit vague. We know that when it comes to the strength of his physical body, he is well above 15 Finger Sukuna. He was able to punch him and send him flying through the city. But Mahoraga was susceptible to the slashes. But you know, slashes is very specific. Slashes are a way of bypassing conventional durability because knives are purposefully made sharp to cut through things without the use of a great amount of force. The reason this is important is because we can't just assume that since 15 Finger Sukuna's slashes were able to cut Mahoraga, it does not mean that Gojo's red should be able to also easily go through Mahoraga just because Gojo is stronger than Sukuna at that time. Because slashes and red work in 2 completely different ways. You see, red is just a force that pushes something backwards, it repels. Slashes are purposefully meant to pierce things. So imagine if somebody just placed both of their hands on your chest and pushed you very hard backwards. You might take damage from this push depending on how hard they hit you. Now imagine instead they used a knife this time. They could do the same thing by putting the knife to your chest and thrusting forward, but this time the knife would just go straight through you. This is the difference between the red and Sukuna slashes. This means that for Gojo to be able to take out Mahoraga in just 1 red attack, he will need to generate enough force to where not only is he just pushing Mahoraga backwards, he is pushing him back with so much force that it is also completely tearing him apart, which is the key factor. You can't just let half of Mahoraga's body stand there after using red. You need to take him out completely or else you will give him a chance to adapt and just regenerate, which is exactly what we saw happen with Sukuna. It doesn't matter, you can slash Mahoraga as many times as you want, even inside of a domain expansion where he gets slashed over hundreds of times. As long as he's adapted, he'll be okay. And it is also important to note that when it comes to longevity, Gojo definitely has the upper hand. If anybody was on a timer right now, it would definitely be Sukuna. We know that Gojo loses almost no curse energy whenever activating a curse technique, and he also has reverse curse technique running around the clock on his body. He still has all of these things. And even though Sukuna has a large amount of curse energy, we see that Yuta even says that Sukuna probably has double the amount that he has. Sukuna still has a finite amount of curse energy, which means if the fight continues to go on and on, Sukuna would eventually be at a disadvantage because he would get low or even run out of curse energy. Which means I think it's about time I say what I think Sukuna has up his sleeve for what he is going to use to end this fight. I think that there are 3 major things that haven't been fully explained yet, but Sukuna has a good chance of using them at the end of this fight with Gojo. The first of the 3 things is the 9th Shikigami. As you can see here, we don't actually know what the 9th Shikigami is. We know what 1 through 8 is, and we know that number 10 is Mahoraga, but we still don't know what the 9th Shikigami is. And there are theories out there that this 9th Shikigami could be some large skeleton that is almost the size of a city, but we'll actually never know unless Gege decides to show it to us. That is just the first of the 3 things. The second thing that I think Sukuna has up his sleeve is Yorozu's tool, and we just know for a fact that he is going to use this at some point. We saw that actually before he accepted the fight with Gojo, he thought about Yorozu's words, and then we even see a couple chapters ago, as Gojo is punching Sukuna in the face, he thinks about Yorozu's words again. I don't think that this is for no reason. I think that Gege is having Sukuna think of Yorozu's words multiple times for a reason. We saw that Yorozu crafted something for Sukuna at the end of her life, and it would make the most sense that she would have crafted him a tool. We don't know what this tool could be, and I think that Gege is purposefully keeping it hidden to build up this suspense, because it is basically guaranteed that this tool will come out at some point because of all of these references to Yorozu's words. I've seen a couple theories that this tool could be similar to the inverted Spear of Heaven, where it just negates curse techniques, so we might just see another Toji incident, but there's no way for us to know until Gege shows us. Now, the third thing that Sukuna is definitely still hiding up his sleeve is his open technique. Remember when Sukuna was fighting against Jogo and he said the word open? A black box appeared and he was able to use flames. There's a bunch of theories on what this open actually means, and this is once again something that Gege has purposefully kept hidden because it will come into play later in the story and Gege wants it to surprise us. One of the most popular theories for what this open technique actually is that Sukuna gets the techniques of people that he has eaten in the past, because there's this whole theory about Sukuna's curse technique truly being getting the curse techniques of people he eats, and there is just a long thread for this theory on Reddit forums and other forums, so if you want to take a look at that theory, then I would say you should. It is pretty interesting. But if this is true, then this means that Sukuna has other curse techniques in these black boxes that he can use in a fight against Gojo. Now, I do want to say that I think Sukuna possibly could be setting up a deadly combination with this flame arrow that we saw, because we know that the flame arrow, even after Mahoraga was able to take every other slash, was able to take hundreds of slashes and get up and regenerate, one flame arrow was enough to take Mahoraga out entirely. And we see that in the fan book, the flame arrow is described as burning the target down to its bone marrow. Sukuna might use Mahoraga's adaptation to infinity in order to hit Gojo with either Yorozu's tool while his infinity is down, or even hit Gojo with the flame arrow. The effectiveness of this tool or this arrow on Gojo's physical body would just have to wait and see, but it does just seem like a dangerous combination that even Gojo would be in trouble if he was hit by. Seeing whether or not Sukuna will use one of these combinations will be very interesting, because he needs to do something in order to speed this fight up. At the rate that this fight is going, I would say that Gojo actually has an advantage in the long run. So as I'm wrapping the video up, I will say this: if you're a Gojo fan, here are the things you need to be looking forward to. Gojo's regeneration from this slash. Because of the brain things that I talked about earlier, it is possible that Gojo should just be able to heal from this and he won't be too affected, because the way that he's healing now is much different than what he was doing to his brain beforehand, where he was destroying a piece of his brain and then basically putting it back together again. And you should also be looking forward to future red attacks that would possibly take out Mahoraga in one blow, because although we don't know if he would actually be able to one-shot Mahoraga, Gojo was confident that he would be able to earlier in the fight, so it is possible that Gojo could just take Mahoraga down in one blow. And one last thing for the Gojo side of things, you see how Gojo was trapped in the shadows and Mahoraga was able to land a free hit? If Gojo could ever get Sukuna trapped in any sort of way throughout this fight, Gojo might have a good chance of landing a purple on him at close range, and this would possibly end the fight for Gojo. Now, if you're a Sukuna fan, then here are the things that you need to look forward to. The hidden techniques that Sukuna still has that we don't have full explanation on and we haven't seen them at all yet, along with the fact that he is very hard to kill as well. Although we've seen that him and Gojo have gone back and forth with plenty of attacks, Sukuna has definitely taken more damage and he has just continued to persist forward. The three things you mainly should be looking out for is the Yorozu tool, the 9th Shikigami, and the open technique. All three of these things will truly determine the outcome of this fight in the near future. And with that being said, I want to thank you so much for reaching the end of the video, and if you enjoyed, then I would really appreciate if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as I do post on different topics that you guys give me and a few that I come up with on my own. Also, if you have any video ideas, just let me know in the comments below and I'll definitely check them out, because I do grab a good amount of my video topics from you guys. And once again, I just want to say thank you so much for watching and see you guys next time.